Why are Americans so angry? It seems that anger and rage have overtaken our culture, politics, and public discourse. Here with more about what to do about it is Peter Wood. Mr. Wood is the president of the National Association of Scholars. His latest book is Wrath, America Enraged. Peter, it's good to talk with you about this. So why are Americans so angry and enraged in 2021?
Well, I think the immediate provocations were the presidential election in 2020 and the riot in the American Capitol on January 6th, 2021. But there's no end of provocations that are playing a part in this. The arrival of large numbers of people on our Mexican border, the backing up of ships off the West Coast and East Coast trying to deliver goods here, the unleashing of inflation into the mainstream economy, our disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan. Well, there's others, but that'll do for a start. Each of these has brought the temper of mainstream Americans to a near boil.
Not to mention the pandemic and those lengthy shutdowns and people losing their jobs, businesses. In your book, you contend that Americans have always possessed a certain degree of anger and discontent, starting, I guess, with the Boston Tea Party, the Revolutionary War. George Washington had a temper, but you write he bound it with the steel hoops of a code of respect for other people. You say American society is different now. There's a new anger. So how does this new anger differ from the old anger?
Our anger was something that we fought against in ourselves from early on in American life. We realized that you couldn't really develop a community that could live in peace with itself if you licensed people to be angry all the time. So we developed early on a pretty strict code that said that giving vent to anger too easily or too often or too viciously was going to be a mark of a person who was not adapted to social life. So such people were scorned, they were reprimanded, children were raised to control their tempers, husbands and wives learned to get along with each other by putting anger to the side. We couldn't always live up to these codes, of course, but the fact was that they were codes, that we had a response to the person who was too much angry too much of the time. All of that began to change after World War II. It's an interesting historical set of developments that today we don't spend too much time on, but it's worth remembering that it was around then that Freudian psychoanalysis made its beachhead in America. And what did it teach? It taught that being angry and repressing it was a cause of neurosis. You shouldn't repress your anger. It would come back as some form of mental illness, mild or severe.
How has this played out now in our culture? What effect have movies, television, music, social media had on helping to create and foment what you call this anger culture?
Right. It's been an avalanche of first popular culture and then into our politics starting in the 1990s. I'd say the first real burst of what I call new anger on the political scene came during George Bush's presidency when there were political commentators avowedly declaring their hatred of him. A flamboyant, self-regarding, prideful form of anger on the political left took real form then. Along with the social media, which gave people an immediate feedback to their anger. They could express outrageous opinions and get attaboys from other people reading them. We began to become a culture that celebrated anger to the point where there was no relief from it. It entered into a 24-hour cycle of expressing our hatred of one another.
Then entered Donald Trump. And
Right.
You mentioned a quote from Kamala Harris before she was elected vice president. It's from June 2020, where she responds to a question about Black Lives Matter and Antifa riots. Tell us about that and how comments from politicians from both sides of the aisle, even Donald Trump, have added fuel to this wrath that you talk about.
Well, let me start with Donald Trump. Back when I first started writing about anger, I had a book in 2016 titled "A Bee in the Mouth, Anger in America Now." I saw Donald Trump as a kind of anger impresario. He may not have been personally angry, but he performed it really well. And he became a sort of personification of what performative anger looked like. But there was behind it a certain element of good humor, completely lost on the political left, which, starting with his inauguration in 2016, just went all out with a kind of hatred campaign for him for the next 4 years. By the time Kamala Harris was running for the Democratic nomination in 2020, she was all on the side of those people who had turned out into the streets to riot in the wake of George Floyd's death in the hands of the police in Minneapolis in earlier part of that year. And she took as her campaign song a song that was sort of the inverse of Happy Days or Here Again. It was an all-out anger anthem. She became someone who I think had decided that riding the anger train was going to be the way to political popularity. On the right, it's a little bit different. It's really very much an anger rooted in resentment and disappointment for being marginalized. All those people that Hillary Clinton called deplorables now find themselves being reclassified by Attorney General Merrick Garland as potential terrorists. This does not sit well with the 75 million or so people in America who voted for Trump. It also doesn't sit very well with people who consider themselves not Trumpists, but some kind of political centrists who deplore seeing the nation divided into two warring camps. So I think we are dealing with wrath, for sure. It's mutual wrath. The division of the country into two almost warring camps is not news. What I'm trying to drive at is that with all this wrath, we need to go in search of some way to make a workable country out of it, which is clearly not going to be an easy thing to do.
Okay, Peter Wood, author of the book Wrath, America Enraged. Thank you for sharing those insights. We appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much for having me.